What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous Georgian goes checking in here. Gonna talk to your boy Eryk Anders. He's got a fight coming up on August 9th. The fight takes place here in Las Vegas at the Apex. His opponent, Christian Leroy Duncan. What's up? What's up, Eryk? How are you, sir?
Man, nothing much. Just getting in from training and fin to spend the rest of my day in the hot sun watching my son do the 7-on-7 thing.
Your
Nice.
face looks thin, man.
Yeah,
Weight's
we're
coming off,
getting
huh?
lean. We fight in about I guess 3 weeks.
Do you still
So
feel strong, or do you kind of weaken as a man? I guess in a way, just because you're so
nah,
depleted from
nah,
calories.
nah. The mask is steel, man. We're strong. We're good.
Okay, all right. You mentioned your kid, and obviously you have a football background. What level is he at? What grade?
He's gonna be a sophomore in high school. And in the summertime. He plays tackle, but in the summertime, the skilled positions they go out there and do 7-on-7, these 7-on-7 tournaments, just to get reps with coverage and things like that. So he's doing pretty well. I think he's exceeding a lot of expectations from his coaches and stuff. So it's a good thing.
Does he got a D1 feature though?
Now we'll see. With the transfer portal and stuff like that, it's hard to come straight out of high school into a major program. So maybe he starts at a school like UAB or a Tulsa or something like that, and then makes his way to one of the bigger schools. We'll see how everything plays out.
What about UNLV? Would you send him to Las Vegas?
He got to tell him he got to follow the money. You know what I'm saying? Wherever the money at, that's where he gonna be at. So wherever the best opportunity is, and like I said, these kids can get paid now. So you're not guaranteed an NFL career, and even if you do make it to the NFL, that's usually a short-lived thing. So let's go get that money while we can.
Right. And how much did you miss NIL by when you were at Alabama? By the way.
I'm an old head, man. The NIL stuff just started coming around, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago. Oh, now was my last year, so if I could get
You
some
guys had
back
the
pay, that'd be
unofficial
great.
NIL, huh?
Yeah, the under the table NIL. I never got none of that. I can honestly say. I wish I did, but I wasn't like a Cam Newton type player or anything like that. So they were just kind of be happy with the scholarship and so $1,000 a month stipend, and you better hope you make it in the NFL and find something else to do.
Ramen noodles 3 times a day. All right. So listen, you you had a nice 2024. You went 2-0. It's been about 8 months or so by the time you fight. A lot of times fighters want to take time off just to rest the body, get better, or maybe they haven't been offered a fight. Others like to continue the momentum. Where did you sit in all this as you're getting older? You have a little bit of a defensive mechanism in the age as well.
Yeah, sure. To be honest, I feel better now at 38 than I did. I may not be as durable or whatever, but I don't have any like nagging injuries or anything like that. I'm aging like fine wine over here, so. Yeah, of course I like to stay active, but this is just, what came across the table when it came across the table, so it's okay. I got a lot of other things going on, so it's I don't have to fight, I enjoy fighting, I love fighting, but I'm trying to move in other avenues, so I'm not like, I used to like press the UFC to fight. I want to fight, want to fight, want to fight, want to fight. But now, I can take my time in between fights. I'm getting ready to open up a gym in September. So, I'm doing all the stuff now to get that going. So I have other things to like occupy my mind and time and stuff like that as well.
Well, congratulations on the new gym, and
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
glad to hear that. I guess you could have fought if they wanted you to. There wasn't a serious injury or nothing like that. That's good to hear.
Nah. Yeah, we're super healthy.
Hmm. Do you guys train smarter, and if so, in what ways? Now that you're older.
I drill a lot. I don't spar nearly as much or as hard as I used to. 2 days a week. Um, but I drill a lot in preparation instead of just beating my head into the wall and trying to do everything. I'm a lot smarter with my diet, so I don't have to like kill myself running or doing cardio and things like that. So um, I think that's kind of what's giving me the longevity that I've had in this sport.
Eric, Duncan is kind of a younger fighter in the sport. He doesn't have as many fights. Does he have anything that he's bringing to the table that is different from what you've prepared for in the past? Because if you go up and down your record, you've actually faced like pretty unique styles throughout your career. It feels like you've seen it all. What does this kid bring to the table?
Um, he's fast and explosive. He moves a lot. He's kind of like Christoph Jocko maybe, but a little bit smoother. Tall, long for the division. I feel like, and I'm sure he'll present his own problems. But I faced a lot of adversity in the sport and in the fights, and have been able to still get my hand raised. So I think experience and things like that are something that I'll be able to fall back on in the course of the fight.
Do you feel like you still carry that momentum from 2024? Does it feel fresh in you?
Yeah, of course. Coming off a win over a former champion, and you know, um, I feel good, man. I really do. I know a lot of people say that. Every fighter says that, but man, I feel fast. I feel explosive. My cardio is really good. I recover in between rounds. Really well. So I think like the better shape and cardio and things and things like that. The more damage you can absorb. You know what I mean? So you'll be able to recover faster. So I think I can kind of make it grimy, and if I need to take a little to give a little, I'll be able to do so.
You mentioned you have a lot going on outside of fighting, but should the opportunity pop up where you could turn it around and do it again relatively quickly, would you be open to something like that?
Yeah, of course. They're going to San Antonio. That's my hometown. So that'd be like a dream come true. That's the last fight on my contract and my 20th fight, and I'd be good with retiring after that, and that's the plan, anyways. But if not there, then I was supposed to fight in Madison Square Garden last year against Wadman, but got sick, couldn't fight. Doctors pulled me from the fight, and then we fought in Vegas. So Madison Square is like the mecca for combat sports. Big boxing bouts. UFC fights have happened there. So I definitely want to fight there. So if I can make that happen, and then that'd be my last fight, then we're off into the sunset, baby.
Eric, you're familiar with Las Vegas, the Apex, all that, the UFC PI. Um, how do you get yourself like fired up and to make it almost feel a little different every single time? Like, are your emotions always the same going through that curtain from fight to fight? Does it change much? Is it venue? What like fires you up as you're walking into that cage?
Well, money is the motivation. I got a lot of things going on that require a bankroll. So I got to go out there, get all my money so that I can do all the things that I want, travel, take my kid places and things like that. So, obviously opening up a gym ain't cheap. So, yeah, I want to get all my money. And a part of that, like who wants to lose? You know what I mean? Winning is also a big motivation, the world just, treats you better. The universe treats you better after a win. You know what I mean? So, especially like winning this fight and opening up a gym a month later is great momentum. People are going to see that and they're going to say, I want to do that. And, so, I think it'll bring more people to the gym as well.
We we talked a little bit about NIL at the start of the interview, and I believe it was Logan Storley in another interview was talking about how now wrestlers in college, uh, because back in the day they didn't really have very many plays once they were done. Now that NIL's around, they've made some decent money and may not want to jump into mixed martial arts. Do you feel like NIL can have an effect on mixed martial arts and wrestlers coming out of college?
Yeah, yeah, of course, because you usually if you're not like an Olympic caliber wrestler, and you wrestle in college after you're done, then what's next? There really aren't very many options. You see Gable Stevenson. That guy won a gold medal. He's been a national champion, tried the NFL, tried the WWE, and now he's back in college wrestling. Or maybe that was last year that he went back to college wrestling. That was his last year, but yeah, clearly there's money to be made, and why not make money doing what you love? So obviously, like we've all seen the statistics. Out of all the UFC champions, the vast majority are wrestlers. So I think guys like a Bo Nickel, for example, he could probably make decent money, pretty good money, wrestling in college, and then he doesn't have to go through that phase where you're not making any money, and then as an amateur, and then you turn pro, you're still not making very much money, and then the money comes after you make it to the UFC. You can stack your money in college, and then you can move out to a place like South Florida and go train at Kill Cliff, American Top Team or whatever, and learn how to fight and not have to like go through that starvation phase. You know what I mean? Where you have to work a job. You're not living comfortably because you're probably working like a minimum wage job or whatever, trying to make it or whatever. So. I think that yeah, a lot of kids will stay in college and try to maximize that money, but then when they come out, they'll be even better. They got more reps. They can go, uh, train at a high level gym and, have some money in their pocket.
Let's go back to the Weidman fight. Would that rank as one of your top fights in terms of I had fun and also name power, name value, him being a former champion?
Yeah, of course. But I think more so than anything, it's my last fight. After I beat Duncan, that'll be the biggest win, because it was the last one. I'm not really wanting to dwell too much on the previous fight. You know what I'm saying? I'm dialed in on Duncan and Weidman. That fight's over and done with. That was 8 months ago, and this is very much so a what have you done for me lately sport. So I gotta go in and get this dub and re up that feeling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess I just meant in terms of like looking back, on your career, you've had a lot of wins, but again, this was a finish over a former champ. I don't know, that night you kind of had this glow about you, like this one felt extra special, maybe.
Yeah, of course. I think yeah, it's cool that that I beat Weidman, I beat a full former champion, and I like Weidman, but to just go out there and like dominate the fight the way I'm capable of. I think after I think that was my 18th UFC fight and 8 years in the with the company, now things are really really starting to like mesh together. I don't have any outside distractions really. All I do is train and even doing in this gym, I'm still training and whatnot, and that's pretty much all I do is train and live the life.
I don't know what his future is, but you could almost say you retired him because he hasn't fought since then, and then he split ways with the UFC, and then the thing never took off with GFL, which I think is where he was headed. But I think we've spoken enough about it. It was a great win. I'm glad that you do have this fight booked because, like I said, I felt like 8 months was a lot, especially after you kind of had a great 2024. I don't know. I like it when fighters are a little bit more active, especially when they got their hand raised. Now, if you're coming off a KO or something like that, and be like, okay. So sometimes it's hard to gauge whether it's the UFC that's stifling the athlete's career, and other athletes, they get booked so frequently.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Like I said, I'm not. I used to be scratching and clawing and begging, let me fight. But it's not. It's not a thing of urgency. at the moment. My money's good. I'm starting to dive off and down other avenues of ways of making money. I started managing fighters not too long ago. So I got some real estate. So I'm doing well financially. Back in a few years ago, I wasn't. So I wanted to keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting. And now with only 2 fights left, like, you know, um, I'm ready to retire, but I'm not ready to retire. Kind of floating that little line thing.
Let's go over
So
that scenario, by the way, because it was interesting to hear it. You said you want to get this fight done, and then you'd like to fight in San Antonio, which, for those that don't know, that's the Noche UFC card, September 13th. It's no longer pay per view; it's a Noche UFC, and it's headlined by, let's see, who's that? Diego Lopez, I think, is going to throw down on that one.
Diego Lopez and Gene Silva.
Gene, so oof, what a great main event. Now,
Uh,
you know, fighters that open their mouths and say what they want sometimes get it. So, would you have a call out ready, a name and location if things go your way on Saturday?
Um, I really haven't really observed the landscape. But I've always thought like a really good fight would be me versus Michelle Oleksiejczyk, the Polish kid. But I think he fights the week after me, and I think he's fighting Mearshart in Chicago. So I don't know. So probably San Antonio won't work out for that, but for sure, I think we should both be available for Madison Square, and I think that's just a great fight for both of us. We both kind of like to stand and throw, and he's a lefty, I'm a lefty, and he's knocked a lot of people out. I knocked a lot of people out, so I just think it's a fun fight for him, for me, and for everybody watching.
I like that one too. And another name I was going to suggest, I believe he's free because he just fought, was RoboCop.
Yeah, they they actually offered me RoboCop before Weidman, and I was like, "Look, dude, I'm fighting 2 more times and I'm out." Or I guess it was 3 more times then. So I was like, "Man, I'm not really looking to fight anybody in the top 15. I don't want to fight no 24-year-old." And then they offered Weidman, and I was like, "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." A
Okay.
guy in my age group or whatever. But and I'm not really sure how old Duncan is, but like I said, it's been like 8 months since I fought, so I was just like, all right, whatever.
Yeah. Hey, no, like I say, you've earned your spot to be able to do that. Especially, you know what I really like is when Korean Zombie retired, when Anthony Smith retired, when fighters kind of know it, and it seems like you're at peace with it. They know it. They can go out, have fun, and just sail off into the sunset the proper way. And you know what I mean? Kind of like writing their own script.
Yeah, I think not very many athletes in general get to do that. You see a lot of guys, in NFL, NBA, they play a little bit too long. Like Roy Jones Jr., for example, man, that guy's one of the greatest boxers of all time. But then you look at like his last 10 fights, like he just fought too long. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
that's not the direction that I want to go. I just felt like it was always important to always, opening and keep having other ways to make money. So even when you're not fighting, you can make money. And then when you want to be done, you can be done. And you're not forced to keep fighting. And then the UFC cuts you, and now you have to go to Russia and fight some, whatever, some big juiced up guy or whatever, do stuff that you don't want to do. Like, some people like bare knuckle. Some people have to do bare knuckle just because they have a bit of a name and, they don't got no money. And I don't want to be put in that position. If I want to fight, I'll fight. If I don't, then it's all good.
That's what's up. All right, Eryk. Thanks for the time, man. Great chat. I think we had a good time maneuvering through the different channels of your life, including your son, maybe the next wave in the Anders household, getting it done on the gridiron.
Yeah, he's saying they got a
But
bright future and whatever he decides to do.
there you go. A lot of it is because of your hard work, man. Anyway, thanks for the time here on MMA Junkie Radio, and we would definitely like to talk to you post fight, and as we get to as we get near to your last fight as well. Been a fun ride.
Yes, sir. Of course. You guys got my number, so anytime.